Commander is more like a chess match. Threat recognition is one of the most important things in Magic the Gathering. That player is probably going to be you, and you're going to wish you had that Path of Exile. It is actually not a viable strategy to win. 5 mistakes new players make in Commander. Are you constantly being railed by your friends even though they claim to have similar power level decks to you? Do you feel like when you lose, it's almost out of the blue? Or do you feel like every game you come close to winning, but you can't just seem to push it over that edge to take home the dub? If that's you, then my friend, this video is for you. Right, number 1, we're starting things off with a bang. Don't keep bad hands. What is a bad hand? You know what I'm talking about. We're talking about 2 land hands or less. Don't keep them. I do not care how much you're feeling that top card of your deck is that 3rd land you need. It's not. Okay? The worst thing in Magic is not being able to play the game. Don't keep it. Always mulligan it. There are exceptions to the rule. If you have artifacts that generate mana, Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, all that stuff, then there's an exception. But as a rule, if you can, just chuck the 2 land hands back in. It's not worth the risk. Trust me, just allow yourself to play the game. That's all I'm saying. Even if your deck is more late game focused, what's going to happen is that you are just letting your opponent set up their board and get way ahead of you. By the time you actually get to those lands and you can start doing stuff, they're already going to have a nice big board presence that you are going to be able to do fuck all about. Number 2, pay attention in your opponent's turns. Now I know, Commander is a long game, but if you are sitting there like this... Oh, sorry, is it my turn? Throughout that whole stage, that whole round of turns, then all you are essentially doing is focusing on what you're doing, and at the end of the day, that would be fine if Commander was a race. If it was a race to see whoever could build the best board as quickly as possible, and that was it, and there was no interaction, then that would be fine. But it's not. Commander is more like a chess match. You're trying to predict what your opponent is trying to do. You're trying to look at, how is my opponent trying to win the game? How are they stopping me from winning the game? What can I do to interact? What can I do to prevent that, while also increasing my chances of winning the game? A good place to start when trying to figure out what your opponent's trying to do is look at their Commander, because this is going to be the key card in their deck most of the time that is dictating what their deck does or what the deck is built around and is trying to do. So if you look and your opponents have a Commander that benefits from having a board presence by having a certain amount of creatures, you know they're going to try and swarm the board. So don't just sit there and let them do it. You know that if you ignore them and you attack the other players and you just leave them to build their board, suddenly out of nowhere they're going to just start comboing off and you're just going to be left there without an answer. So put the pressure on them early. If you look at your opponent's Commander and they have a massive dinosaur with haste that's going to be coming down as soon as they hit 8 mana, and they have a on hit ability, I'm looking at you, Gisharth, then you want to make sure that you're going to have as much of a defense as possible so that they are not getting all this damage in and they can start revealing all those cards at the top of their deck. Your opponent is giving you hints of what they're trying to do if you look at that Commander. Number 3, failing to identify threats. Now, threat recognition is one of the most important things in Magic the Gathering, but it can also be one of the hardest things to wrap your head around. You've got 3 opponents. That's 3 different people's worth of cards and boards to keep track of. It's a lot, but it's so important that you are able to recognize which cards are going to be key threats to you. Now, what is a threat? Now, my personal definition of a threat is a card that is helping your opponent, that is keyed, to your opponent winning the game, a card that is preventing you from winning the game, or a card that is generating a lot of value. A lot of the time, players will just look at the biggest, scariest creature on the board and say, right, that is the biggest threat, that needs to die. But a lot of the time, it's not actually the case. It could just be a sneaky little enchantment off to the side of your opponent's board that's actually generating them a hell of a lot of value every turn. That is the main problem. So we've used the word value a lot, but what does this mean? Especially as a new player, it can be quite hard to understand. The way I understand it is that value is basically how much worth you get out of a card relative to how much the cost the card was to play. Let me give you an example of a card from my own collection. Gutter Snipe is a free cost 2/2 card that deals 2 damage to every player every time you cast an instant and sorcery. Now, on the surface, this card doesn't really look like much, not very scary. However, after 6 turns, I could have easily casted 6 instants or sorceries, which in total is 12 damage to each opponent. I'll do the math for you. That's 36 damage that this little free cost is putting out. That is a lot. Now, if it said on this card that this creature will deal 12 damage to each opponent after 6 turns of being in play, I reckon that players would be a little bit more hasty to get rid of it. So this is an example of a card that on the surface doesn't look like much, but is actually generating a lot of value the longer the card stays on the board for. Number 4, focusing all of your attention on one opponent. You know who I'm speaking to. You know who you are. You're the people that like to kick people when they're down. Now, although this might be fun, it is actually not a viable strategy to win. Let me explain. If you put all of your attention into one person, what is going to happen is you're allocating all of your resources into killing that person, and you are making it easier for your other opponents to come and pick the bones and finish you off after you have put all your time and resources into that other opponent. I don't care they talk some shit at the start of the game, or maybe you just don't really like them as a person. Maybe they're a blue player. Lol, I'm a blue player. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, so to combat this, it's usually a good idea to spread all of your attention, resources, and damage out equally on your opponents. They're all coming down gradually until you're like, right, I'm ready to finish all of you off, so you don't have to worry about the backlash, or at least weaken them all so that if you do want to take someone out the game, the counterattack from the next player is not going to be as harmful as it would be if you just leave them alone entirely. Now, there are times where you want to put the horse blinkers on and just focus on that one opponent. An example of this will be if that opponent is just getting out of hand compared to every other player at the board, and usually this is when some diplomacy comes in and you're just like, come on guys, we got to take this guy out. This is not good. Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, turn 1, absolutely not. He needs to die, or she needs to die. Even when you're doing this, right, you could be fooled into putting all of your resources into a player, and in reality one of those other players are actually holding back some resources so they can kill you. Don't be fooled. Be smart. Play to win, if that's what you're trying to do. Maybe you're just playing for fun. I don't know. Number 5, playing cards for the sake of playing cards. Just because you have the mana to play a card doesn't mean you should play the card. Removal is a perfect way to explain this. So let's talk about Paths to Exile. It's a 1-cost white mana removal spell. Now, a lot of the time, you're going to have mana open to cast this card. Too often do I see players just cast a card, they cast a removal just to get rid of something that might be a bit annoying at the time, to then later realize that a big bomb has dropped that is going to essentially lose them the game, and they don't have any answers to it. Whereas if they would have just held that removal spell, they could have got rid of it. Be patient. Be intentional. If you are doing something, make sure there is a viable reason to do so. Unless you have a deck just filled with counter spells, maybe you have a spell slinger deck or something, then maybe there's a few exceptions to this. But as a rule, removal spells are not going to come up constantly. Treat them like little treasures, and make sure you use them when you absolutely need to. When I say treasures, I don't actually mean treasure tokens. Moving on. So let me give you an example. You have a Path to Exile in your hand, and your opponent drops a free cost treasure nabber. Card's quite annoying. It's stealing your arcane signets, your soul rings, and then using it for themselves. It's a bit annoying. You're like, oh, I want to kill this treasure nabber. Okay, so let's say you do that and you play your Path to Exile, you pay your 1 mana and it's gone. Great. That might feel good for a turn or two. But then later on, your opponent's dropping a Scourge of the Throne, a 7-cost dragon 5/5 flyer that is giving them additional combat phases, which essentially is going to win them the game because they're going to be able to take out probably 2 players at once, or even just go ham and attack a certain player twice, which is just obscene. That player is probably going to be you, and you're going to wish you had that Path of Exile. Keep the damn removal spell. Moving on, I'm going to give you another example. Grishnak, the Brash Instigator. There's not a there in there. It's a 3-cost card, 1/1, that allows you to take control of an opponent's creature that is power equal to or less than the power of one of your orc armies until the end of turn. It's a 3-cost card. I could drop this as soon as I have 3 mana, but the chances are I'm not going to have a very big powerful orc army, or if one at all. So this was just a 1/1 that does essentially nothing, or maybe steals a little 2/2 that my opponent might have. Great. Or I could keep hold of this card and play this free cost card when I have 8, 9, 10 mana. That's 8, 9 turns into the game, and then take control of something that's like a 8/8, one of my opponent's biggest blockers, and then use it against them to kill them with it. It's infinitely better. So basically what I'm trying to say is, be patient. Coming back to that point, don't play cards for the sake of playing cards. Be intentional, have a reason, play to win. Now guys, do you know another way you can win more Commander games? By buying more powerful cards. And Modern Horizons 3 has just dropped. So if you want to see what my thoughts are on Modern Horizons 3, why don't you check out my video on Modern Horizons 3, a set for no one. The key in the title, it's not a very positive one. But the set does have a lot of powerful cards in it, so I will say it might be worth picking up some singles. But if you're interested and you are about to buy some sealed product, please, all I recommend is that you watch my video before you do so. Other than that, guys, that is the end of the video. I hope you found this useful, and if you have any other tips for new players, please, as usual, leave them in the comments below. I'm trying to build a community for new players, to help new players with these things. There's plenty of channels out there that are players that are way more advanced and have been playing the game longer than I have, that make all this great content, but sometimes I feel like when I'm watching that content, it's not really made for the brand new player. I'm trying to be as relatable as possible. I know the struggles of a new player. I hope you find these videos useful, and until then, I will see you in the next one. Cheers.